What criminal committed an almost perfect crime and what was the thing that messed it up? Story 1. The Dunbar Armored Robbery, the largest cash heist in U.S. history. A six-man inside job to rob an armored cash depot. They set up a house party as an alibi, used the keys to get into the cafeteria, and waited in there until all employees came in on break, then ambushed and subdued them without firing a shot or raising an alarm. They then loaded the money bags, with over $18 million, into a U-Haul, destroyed the CCTV tapes and returned to the party. Then they sat on the money for 6 months, before hiring a crooked lawyer to set up a real estate money laundering scheme to avoid suspicion. 2 years after the robbery, one of the men paid a real estate broker with a stack of money still wrapped in the original currency strap. The broker immediately reported it to the police. After being arrested, he cracked under interrogation, confessed to the robbery, and ratted out his partners. All the men have since finished their prison sentences, and most of the money was never found, so there's a chance they still won in the end. Story 2. Israel Keyes is almost certainly the smartest serial killer that has been caught. He studied past serial killers and how they were caught. Keyes targeted random people all across the United States to avoid detection with months of planning before he committed a particular crime. He specifically went for campgrounds and isolated locations. He claimed to only use guns when he had to and preferred strangulation. Keyes planned murders long ahead of time and took extraordinary action to avoid detection. Unlike most serial killers, he did not have a victim profile, saying he chose a victim randomly. On his murder trips, he kept his mobile phone turned off and paid for items with cash. He had no connection to any of his known victims. For the Courier murders, Keyes flew to Chicago, where he rented a car to drive 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers, to Vermont. He then used the murder kit he had hidden 2 years earlier to perform the murders. He was only caught because he kidnapped a girl and tried to get ransom money from her parents, and law enforcement tracked him down via withdrawals from her bank account and the car he was seen abducting her in on security cameras. The FBI does not even know how many people he killed, so who knows how long he could have kept it up if he had chosen to continue his usual killings. Story 3. Wolfgang Beltracchi. He made millions with forged paintings he painted all himself. He was ultimately caught because he once accidentally used paint that contained a very slight amount of a substance that wasn't used in the days of the original painter. Story 4. Probably the DC snipers. They couldn't convince the police to talk to them because they were swamped with fake callers, so the snipers told them to look into a murder in another state. This started the chain of events to them being found out, but before that the police had nothing. The public was absolutely terrified and the police had no clue who was responsible. The DC sniper story is one of those things that has kind of been forgotten about, but it was absolutely insane when it happened. I remember them telling people to constantly move their head around while pumping gas. Story 5. The Friday Night Bank Robber was the most prolific bank robber in U.S. history. I believe he had a master's degree in something analytical like math. Was a martial arts instructor. He figured out there's a time of the year in the Northeast where it would be dark out just before the banks closed. He used motorcycles to drive through the woods to these banks and rode it back through the woods to a U-Haul truck he had waiting and would put the bike into the truck and drive away calmly. He did this for a long time, kind of like the robbers in the movie Point Break. He would stop for the rest of the year, which had the police really guessing. They couldn't figure out patterns for a long time. Years later the police started to catch on with his idea of doing it on Friday nights in the Northeast, and from video knew he was probably into martial arts. But that doesn't exactly narrow it down. Dumb luck, some random kid stumbled upon his buried cache of things like a gun, gloves, mask, cash, etc. in the woods. They turn it over to the cops, and that's how they ended up finding out who he was. The FBI gave him some deal where he worked with them and banks on telling them how to prevent bank robberies. Story 6. I knew a guy who got into selling drugs on the dark web. He had this setup where he'd buy the drugs and package them in his room, ship them through USPS, and collect money through cryptocurrency. He made a lot of money, went on for a while without being caught. They even found fictionalized accounts he wrote about how he was able to do this, including driving 50 miles to make drops. He was caught when an employee noticed he was handling large numbers of small envelopes while wearing latex gloves and reported it. He probably would have gotten away with it if he'd worn winter gloves over the latex. Story 7. The real answer is that there are many perfect crimes, in the sense that no one is ever arrested for having committed them. In 1969, Ted Conrad walked out of a bank in Cleveland with $215,000 in cash, equivalent to $1,700,000 in 2021, and was never caught. He lived his life as a free person in Boston before confessing to his family just before he died. Story 8. Loeb and Leopold. Two high IQ teenagers in Chicago in the 1920s committed a murder just because they thought they were too clever to be caught. One of them lost a lens from his glasses, where they dropped the body. Very rare RX that led the police right to them. Also didn't help that the two wouldn't stop talking about how they got away with the killing. Story 9. Ariel Castro gained international attention for abducting, brutalizing, and keeping 3 girls in his house for over 11 years. This was before he forgot the door unlocked one time when he left the house, and Amanda Berry was finally able to run out and use a stranger's phone to dial 911. A lesser-known part of the investigation also found that his next-door neighbor had abducted a girl back in the early 90s, and he still had her remains buried in his basement. He might have never been caught, and that girl would have still been a missing person cold case, if Amanda Berry was never able to make that phone call. Story 10. Susan Smith, the one who drowned her kids in her car. She claimed it was a carjacking by a black man. No weapon or witnesses. The cops had nothing but her word. It was a simple traffic light that got her. She claimed that her light was red and there were no other cars at the light. That couldn't be true with a controlled signal. If there was no cross traffic, her light would not have been red. Story 11. There's the story of Daniel Rigmaiden. He was a scam artist who defrauded the government out of hundreds of thousands in tax money. He was eventually caught, but was so confident that his methods of avoiding capture were thorough that he thought law enforcement had to have been cheating in some way, abusing power. When caught, he turned whistleblower. This kid was smart. Per documentary IMDb, he evades the FBI for months. Once captured, he uses his time, then in prison, to investigate. His obsessive search for the truth leads to a groundbreaking discovery. Law enforcement used a secret technology called a stingray to intercept his phone calls and personal information, as well as those of millions of unsuspecting Americans. He takes his discovery public, and the revelation not only carries implications for his case, but also for the fate of the Fourth Amendment. The stingrays are cell site simulators or IMSI catchers, invasive cell phone surveillance devices that mimic cell phone towers and send out signals to trick cell phones in the area into transmitting their locations and identifying information. When used to track a suspect's cell phone, they also gather information about the phones of countless bystanders who happen to be nearby, as a law enforcement can literally drive down any block with one turned on, having it connect to every single mobile device as it moves down the street. Mobile cell towers. Essentially gathering your information without your knowledge. Story 12. The Knightsbridge Robbery. The boss of the gang cut himself while breaking into the lockboxes and, in the dark, found out too late, there was blood all around the place, too much to clean up. He nevertheless managed to get away with $60 million and hide somewhere in South America, but at some point decided to go back to England to retrieve his Ferrari, being arrested in the process. Story 13. The Antwerp Diamond Heist, the perfect heist of the century where an Italian gang stole 100 million in gems. While leaving Antwerp, they disposed of the disguises and the tools used, but one member of the gang was too lazy to burn everything as instructed. Among the rubbish, the police found envelopes of the Antwerp Diamond Center and a receipt for a sandwich bought at a store close to the center. They recovered video footage of the sandwich store and busted the mastermind of the heist, who didn't give up his mates, but some were later identified. Some of the stolen diamonds are still unaccounted for till this day. Story 14. Charles Schmid. He murdered a teen girl for fun and got away with it, so he murdered some more. He murdered this teen girl and her little sister, who was only 13. He enlisted his best friend, I can't remember his name, to help him bury the bodies. I think they were buried for about 2 weeks before his friend cracked and told the police on him. I think Charles would have been caught sooner or later anyways, he was on his way to becoming a serial killer. Story 15. I worked in the federal prison system. Met a man in his mid-30s who was serving time for a series of bank robberies. His arrest was a complete surprise in his area. Model citizen. Married, young kids. Volunteered and gave generously to his kids' school. His bank robberies were intricately planned and well-timed. One of his underlings decided to open up his own bank robbing business. He wasn't as smart and ratted out our man when he was caught, as part of his plea deal. Story 16. Al Capone was doing all the crimes. And it's the tax evasion that got him. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more. It helps me make more of these videos every day for you to enjoy.